Hello, today we're going to talk about how bedding and pen density impact animal health, animal performance, and carcass characteristics. Keeping cattle dry in confinement is critical. It is critical because these cattle are lying in wet conditions, and if they are in wet conditions, it can increase maintenance requirements up to 10%. It causes discomfort, it reduces feed efficiency. In fact, if their hair coat is wet, maintenance requirements increase 2% for every degree below 30 degrees. For example, a feedlot steer that has a 20% increase in requirements when his hair coat is wet and the outside temperature is 20 degrees. Therefore, in order to get optimum performance, but also to maintain good animal welfare standards, we need to keep cattle dry. So what are the impacts of mud, especially in confinement? Increased heat and cold stress, decreased average daily gain in feed efficiency, decreased dressing percentage due to the weight of mud, decreased economic returns due to the poor feed efficiency and gain, an increased potential for E. coli outbreaks, increased carcass trim at the packing plant, increased processing costs due to slower line speed at a packing plant, an increased chance of product recall due to microbial contamination, and the increased potential for having to have a cost of recovery of product if a recall due to microbial contamination occurs. When we are evaluating bedding in a facility, there is a 5-point scale that is often used. I cite this from Mader and Colgan at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. 0 would be clean cattle with no mud. 1 would be small lumps of mud on the hide and limited areas of the legs and underbelly. And we want a score of 0 to 1. A score of 2 would be small and large clumps of mud covering larger areas of the leg, side, and underbelly. A score of 3 would be small and large clumps of mud covering the hide and areas along the hindquarter, stomach, and front shoulder. And a score of 4 would be lumps of mud continuously covering the underbelly and side of the animal from brisket to the rear quarter. This is a picture of animals that I would give a score of 0 to. We cannot avoid some mud on the knees of cattle. However, if you look at the shoulders, the sides of these cattle, they're very clean. This would be a condition score of 1. We see some small lumps of mud in limited areas of the leg and the underbelly. However, most of the underbelly is clear. When we get to a condition score of 2, we start having animals that will increase processing costs at the packing plant. We see small and large clumps of mud on the legs, the side, and the underbelly. And then in a body condition score 3, we also see mud on the shoulders. So when we get to this area, we are really increasing the risk of microbial contamination. And these are animals that have had a reduction in efficiency simply because of the winter cost of maintaining their temperature while wet. This is a picture of an animal with a condition score of 4, and this is to be highly avoided. So these 2 pictures were taken at a processing plant, and this shows mud on the belly of animals due to poor bedding management. This causes increased processing costs due to slower line speed, increased labor, increased product trim, and an increased chance of microbial contamination of meat products. While the packing plant would not allow video, I encourage you to go online to any harvest demonstrations that show that when these carcasses are being processed, the midline of the belly is split to expose the intestines and to get inside the carcass. This is why microbial contamination is more likely when you have mud on the belly. Some bedding considerations are that there are many different types of bedding used in barns. Typical bedding types are corn stalks, straw, soybean stubble, and wood chips. Bedding is usually added at regular intervals, ranging from every other day to once a week. The amount of bedding varies depending on the size of the animals, the density of the animals in the pen, air temperature, and humidity. More bedding is needed during the winter and wet periods and in poorly ventilated barns. More bedding is necessary to keep the bedded pack drier during these periods when moisture is available so that the moisture is absorbed. And when not enough bedding is added to the barn, the producer can easily tell that the animals are dirtier using that 5-point scoring scale we just discussed. The Iowa State University estimated the absorption of bedding materials, with the highest being pine chips and the poorest being hardwood or shredded newspaper. Normally, we are using oat straw, wheat straw, ground corn cobs, or corn stover. I showed this to show that in the summer, bedding should be somewhere around 4.6 pounds of bedding per head per day, and in the winter moves up to 5.8. It averages 5.2 pounds per head per day, with more in the winter. So as we are thinking about how much bedding we need, if you multiply 5 pounds times the number of animals times the number of days, that should come up with a good estimate of how much bedding you need to get through a year. So I want to show some pictures of cattle in various stages of bedding. These two pictures show cattle that would have a mud score of 0. They are either outside or inside in these pictures, with corn stalks used as bedding on the right-hand side. These are examples of freshly bedded cattle that already have a mud score of 2. And the reason I show these is that even if you start putting down bedding, but you've created a mud layer clinging to the hair of these animals, it's going to be very unlikely that that mud ever leaves. So when we start considering mud scores on cattle, we have to stay ahead of the game, because if we get behind, it's very difficult to clean up. These are pictures of very poor bed packs, creating a great deal of mud on these cattle. And the thing is that the pens also look wet. So every time these animals lay down, they're suffering from an efficiency and a gain standpoint. And animals that are suffering from discomfort do not eat to their expected level of feed intake. So this is a situation that we completely want to avoid. So what are some bedding procedures? The average amount of bedding recommended in covered barns is 5 pounds per animal per day. So if cattle are bedded daily, that's 5 pounds per animal, and in a pen with 50 animals, that's 250 pounds daily. If we move to bedding every 3 days, that's 15 pounds of bedding per animal, or 750 pounds of bedding every 3 days for 50 animals. If cattle are bedded weekly, that's 35 pounds of bedding per animal, and in a pen with 50 animals, that's 1,750 pounds of bedding. So what's the difference between these bedding frequencies that we can see? We have to keep in mind that the goal of bedding management is to keep cattle clean and dry. Inadequate bedding is easily observed by the amount of mud on the hide, and bedding more often allows a producer to inspect the manure in the pen to see if the cattle are exhibiting signs of acidosis. Also, if bedding is done less often, more bedding is needed each time the cattle are bedded. If cattle are given a lot of bedding at one time but bedded less frequently, they tend to consume the bedding on the days they're bedded. If an animal is being fed a high grain diet, consumes bedding, that day's intake of the desired diet in the feed bunk will be reduced. The following day, the cattle may be hungry and overeat their grain diet. This underconsumption and overconsumption related to infrequent bedding can cause acidosis, the same as an improperly managed feed bunk causes acidosis, which leads to reduced average daily gain and feed efficiency. So just to show a picture of what I consider to be a properly chopped and bedded pen, this is a picture of chopped straw. And to me, this is an exceptional example of what a pen should look like. So the timing of bedding. When bedding cattle, wait until the cattle have consumed their morning feeding before bedding, as this will help with maintaining feed intake that day. The cattle will already be full. When bedding cattle, take the opportunity to look at the manure in the pen to evaluate the cattle for signs of acidosis. And the best indicators are manure and swollen hooves, long hooves, and cattle that limp. To look at predicting acidosis for manure, I show two pictures here that are normal. The picture on the left is normal in a diet with a lot of fiber. The picture on the right is normal if not a lot of fiber is present in the diet, such as would occur in a high grain diet. These two pictures show cattle with various levels of acidosis. On the left, we see mucus in that manure, and that's the lining of the intestines. In the right, we see severe acidosis with pooling of water from diarrhea. These cattle would be heavily stressed. Even in a pen setting, cattle with acidosis exhibit pica. Pica is the unnatural chewing of dirt and soil. And if you go into a pen of cattle in a barn with a dirt floor that has severe acidosis, you can see holes where they've dug down. That's what's occurring in this picture of an outdoor pen of cattle. This is a clear sign that those animals are suffering from acidosis. The other thing that we need to look at are long hooves. And this is a picture of a badly swollen foot taken at a packing plant. It indicates chronic acidosis from improper bunk management or improper bedding management, resulting in increased fluctuations in intake. When you get acidosis, there's a decrease in the rumen pH, which leads to lactic acid being produced and absorbed. You get a reduction in blood pH. As blood pH goes down, you get constriction of the capillaries, and the small capillaries leading to the hooves are greatly impacted, and you get laminitis. Cattle in pain from laminitis are under stress. They walk less, they eat less, they have reduced average daily gain and feed efficiency, and we really need to keep an eye on hooves and the length of hooves when we're walking pens. So when I walk a pen of cattle, I'm looking at hooves. I'm looking at the amount of mud on the hide. I'm looking at the manure in the pen. All of these visual indicators help us in our day-to-day management. Some final thoughts. Bedding management is critical to animal health, profitability, and reducing the incidence of microbial contamination on carcasses. Acidosis is preventable with proper bunk management and bedding management. Bedding more frequently keeps cattle from over-consuming bedding, which can lead to feed intake fluctuations and acidosis, and overcrowding must be avoided as a crowded bed pack cannot be kept dry. Allow 50 square feet of animal minimum, and I don't count the 10 feet immediately behind a feed bunk as part of my bed pack. I take that out of the equation because that is space where animals are walking and moving and not bedding. So if I have a pen that is 100 feet wide by 30 feet deep, I only count 20 feet of that 30 feet when I multiply for the amount of area for my bed pack. In that situation, I would multiply 20 times 100, not 30 times 100. Thank you.